All right, so now we go back into Blender. So we've already exported our file, we've exported our normal map, and now we want to go back into our shaders. So now we've got two materials. We have our normal bake, which we use to set up our normal when we're baking it, or normal preview, but now we also want to have something we can color. So we're going to create a new texture, or a new material. To do that, we're going to make a copy of our current one, and now we have this one, which we will rename to color, which is very generic. You probably shouldn't name your material color, but oh well. Now we're going to add another image node, our image texture node, and put it there. We're going to have it give a new image, and in this case, I am going to up it to a 2048, just because I want to use that. Let's be a bit bigger, 48. And we want to set, I prefer to set this to be transparent. This just makes it easier for me to work with, and you'll kind of understand why in a minute. And we're going to call this Crodlu left. Okay. And we're going to connect that color node to our base color node here. Now that overrode the green that we put down, and it's defaulting the transparency to black, and that's fine. That will make sense later, but don't worry about it. So this is how we're going to have our color preview with our map preview. So now we want to just paint it, and this gets kind of fun. So we're going to go to texture paint. So we've done I have to use the layout tab, the UV editing tab, the shading tab, now the texture paint tab. So in the texture paint tab, I have no idea where my model is. Huh. Oh, he's invisible. So let's see if I can get a mark across him. There he is. So one problem with me making him invisible is I forgot he would render that way. So let's, there he is. So we were looking at him in solid view, and we want to make sure we have the material preview, which is showing our actual materials on the object. So now he looks as we would expect. When we are painting him, you'll notice we want to make sure over here we don't have the normal selected, but we have our color image selected, which is transparent now because we asked it to be. And we're going to fill our curve with just a base color. So let's make him sort of a brownish tan because it's a desert dwelling animal. I'm going to go for like a neutral sandy tone, and I'm just going to fill it. All right, and now we can see everything over here. I'm also going to go, as I'm working, because I'll want to recall my colors, I want to expand my color palette, create a new one, and add. You don't have to do this. I like to have my colors available so I can work with them later. So that gets our base paint of coat of paint on this guy. Now, if we just want to do, it's almost just like MS Paint in 3D. So I can just take a brush. The brushes are pretty straightforward. So if I want to go for like maybe a darker brown, like a sort of a dark, maybe reddish brown like that, and I want to use that for his sort of main color, I can do that. It's a little darker than I'd choose. So what I might say is instead of just directly painting him, which we could totally do, make him sort of a nice ruddy brown, we instead of painting him like this, we could say, okay, maybe I want to do a different kind of mix. I'm showing you this because it gives you a lot of control, especially if you have a base color that you like. So you have options here. I'm going to scoot this over for a second. For every for your draw, your paint fill, things like that, you have mix, which is basically taking a color and painting it on top. That's your mix. Let's do it over. Let's pick out on his tail. There's your mix. You also have things that are kind of normal if you've worked in like Photoshop or GIMP or other sort of painting software. You have dark and multiply, color burn, linear burn. These all have different effects. Multiply is a great option for just wanting things to be darker but within the same tonal range. So the problem here is you're like, wow, that is really dark. Well, we can adjust the strength. So I might tone that down a lot, and well, maybe not quite that much. But now I can kind of get a light shading going. And every time I stroke, it's going to be a little bit darker, which gives you a lot of control over sort of creating light and shadow effects, and sort of just building up gradient surfaces as you're going along. So that I quite frankly prefer quite a bit. And I think it's nice because you can sort of get a lot of tonality that way. But since this is more just demoing things, I might take that. See, this is it. I enjoy this stage. I just want to have fun painting. But this is the kind of fun part. Like, this is the part where you just sort of build up your surfaces. Now, obviously, I've stuck with the multiply brush and kind of started to go to town with it. Another thing to consider is, how do you paint between sections? Now, I say if you're painting a creature with clothes on, you start with a base. And see, I've totally messed up this area here. He's all blotchy. But we're just going to go with it for the demo. And maybe just darken that a lot. He's a dark brown. I just say paint over your areas. And ignore the fact that there are, clothes, saddles, things like that. And I would come back and do that as a detail work. That way you can kind of get your strokes going and sort of get the feel for parts as you're going along without slowing down your flow. So that way the whole creature feels put together on their own without worrying about some of those detail things, and like trying to shade him while avoiding shading the barding is a little bit tricky. So I'm going to just shade him as is. Now you'll notice as I'm doing this, a few things are happening. Over here, you're seeing this coloration take place across the model. It's kind of neat. You also may notice, and maybe not as much on this model, but there's certain areas that aren't taking the color maybe like they should, or there are areas that are getting flecks of color that I wouldn't expect. Now, this is happening because of how we've set up our model with what I call the fast and loose method. So the fast and loose method, as I said, we're not paying a lot of attention to where some of our lines are. We're not doing any seam painting to tell Blender where to draw the lines on certain things. We're obviously being fast, so we're getting a lot of overpainting, and that's fine. But if you are wanting to be much more detailed and this approach bothers you, then I suggest watching the other video that I'm going to do, which is how do you do it, I guess, quote unquote, the correct way, where you do some seam painting to break out your parts. But still, for TaleWeaver, that guy will probably stand out pretty well. So now let's say I want to stick within that same tonal range without picking necessarily a new color. So just put that in my thing. And I want to do like some lightening in places, some highlights. I might, instead of the multiply tool, let's see if I do like a color burn, maybe a bright yellow. And I say, if you aren't familiar with these tools, just play with them. Like, see, that does a little colory splash, and of course the strength is really low, so it just sort of highlights things. I don't want to use the green though. Color burn in a bright kind of orangish. I'll see how that makes it much darker than you'd think, but I would expect that. Let's see, what's my one I want to go for? Is it overlay? Yeah, overlay is kind of fun. Let's do that just to give a little zing color to him. And I'm backing out pretty far, and I'm not being super clean with my approach, so I'm getting a lot of like overspray as it is, but that's okay. Make him kind of glow a bit. But you can see how that what am I using again? The overlay effect is giving this nice reddish kind of tone on that brown, and it's giving me a nice, I think, rather fun, really vibrant transition. That'll serve us well when we drop it into the game. Now he looks a little fiery. I kind of like that. His toes a little more yellow. Now, let's say I like something, but maybe I want to do a little blur to it. We can soften things, which sort of takes things and does like a little bit of mixing. It gets rid of some of the hard edges, depending. We're going to talk about why we're seeing some peeking through there. And we can smear things. So if you've got lines that don't blend well, gosh, that's awful smearing. The strength is too high. Let's drop that down. this sort of can soften things. It might slow down your system a bit, but if you have some odd lines, you're like, no, I like the colors, but they're bleeding in a weird way. Let's like blur that a bit and smear it around so it sort of blends. We can do that. Now, another thing you're going to be noticing periodically as I'm doing this is there's some funky colors that have patchworked through. Now, some of this I'm just sort of glossing over because, you know what, he's going to look good when we start getting him in game. You'll see my computer is a little stressed out because there's a lot that I'm trying to do here really quickly. But every now and then you'll notice that there is something we call a bit of bleed happening. And that's going to be where, like, where's an example of that? I know they saw it a minute ago. We had like a fleck of black coming through in a space that we would not have expected it. So I'm just going to keep doing this until I spot it. Ah, perfect. There. See how when I'm blurring here, I'm getting something black? Well, where's that coming from? Well, this is probably coming from another part of our creature. So it's happening because as we're blurring, it's doing a lot of that action over here. And if you have sections that are right up on each other, now we've have things islanded out a little bit, so it shouldn't be happening that much. But if you have sections that it assumes are slightly interconnected because of how they're located here, you're going to see them bleed a bit. Now, if you are, you can kind of work them into your model a little bit and, kind of blur them out, especially if we're doing, like I said, the sort of fast and loose method. And if you don't want to sort of sweat it too much, you just sort of work around it like with a little bit of brush, a little bit of work like that, and you're good. But you might then find that you've got red somewhere else that you didn't anticipate. So just know that as you're working, you might see some of this be a little bit weird just because we don't have seams and it did its best job to figure out where to put things. Just don't panic and just let it, kind of enjoy the fact that it might be a little bit messy and know that you're going to be seeing it in game. No one's going to be flipping, you can't flip the mini upside down and look at it from certain angles. So it's really more about just the overall impact. You'll also notice I tend to go for very, very bright because if you look at the hacker model, the colors in it were really bright because when you move it into the rendering environment of TaleSpire, there is lighting and reflective lighting and shadows that end up darkening the figure considerably. So I'm going to guess when we actually put this guy in the TaleWeaver with these colors, he's going to look super, super dark. So what I would recommend is as you're working, feel free to export your image that you're working on periodically just to see if it looks really different in the other system and know that you have to kind of adjust yourself accordingly. So I'm going to just drop some color on this bedroll. And what did I do? I hit something over here. Oh, that's because I'm using the blur tool. Let's go for a nice contrasting color, maybe a bright green. Now I'm doing this with an overlay. Let's just go for a regular old mix. And maybe when I'm doing this, I don't want it to like spray off to the side at all. I want this to be pretty direct. And obviously you're getting a little overspray when you do that, so just be careful. But we also can change the way our brush is. So once again, I'm going to scoot this over so we can see, not brush. So brush, we don't have a lot of options there. We want to look at also our stroke. Not stroke, what is it? Where is what I'm looking for? Watch me struggle. Ah, here it is. Falloff. This falloff is typically at what's like a smooth falloff. Apparently I hit custom at some point, but don't worry about it. You also have these other options, and they affect the way the strength affects the edge of your brush. So if you have something like a sphere falloff, let me pick a really bright color that's going to stand out. And I put it across there. You can see that it kind of goes up to the edges in a certain way. Actually, let's do a higher strength. If I do a fall off that is constant, we see it's got, even now, this is easier to see, you've got really, like, it basically falls off at the pixel. It doesn't kind of soften that edge. You can also do one maybe that is sharp. And you're getting, it's falling off, see where I've got my circle? It's really only hitting the center of that circle versus going all the way to the edges versus being right at the edge but not having any kind of softness at all. So that is what that indicates. So if we go back over here, and I'm doing things that are, I really just want it to be a solid color and not blurry at all, I might say, okay, let me get maybe I'll do like a kind of a turquoise-ish color, maybe like that. And I'm doing this super bright and like, wow, that's garish. But you see how, because I did the fallout the way I did, I'm really just going right along. Now I got a little bit of overpainting going. I'm not too worried about it. Let me increase the strength all the way though, because I'm not doing it at full strength. It's sort of retaining some of that that I'd painted before. I don't want that. So I'm just gonna, now what I want to see, now that I put this really bright color on, is, well, did it end up splashing little flecks somewhere else on my model? That might have been me. I might have hit that by mistake. I could Control Z forever to see if I get rid of it, or I could just sort of, can I blur it out? Can I blur it out? Nope. Can I smear it out? Yeah, I can kind of get rid of that. If I just do that for a minute, let's just smudge it out with my finger. There we go. Perfect. All right, and so there's that. Ugh. I want to paint this out real quick. Let's go to my paintbrush. Let's pick a darker brown, like an orangish brown, like a little too similar to the Crow Blue though. Let's maybe like that for now. Yeah, I'll do that. Perfect. All right, so that's a rapid paint. Oh, well, no, let's do the eyes real quick. I think in my original model that I painted in real life, the eyes were black. See how that looks. Ooh, creepy. I could also do a bright red. Ooh, even creepier. Let's maybe green eyes. That'd be less creepy. No, I'll stick with black eyes. Look more birdy if they've got black eyes. Okay, we'll just do that. Throttle. I didn't finish painting it, obviously. I've got some strap work to do. We'll talk about this on the front, but let's see what that looks like. So to do this, we're going to take our image texture here and image, save as, and it automatically saves it as the name of what we've got. So we'll leave all this as is with no compression, and I'll save the image. So now let's see what that looks like in TaleWeaver. All right, so we're back in TaleWeaver. We still got our Crowley that we imported earlier with the normal texture. So now let's add in that color. So asset, import new asset, Crowley left color. Okay. And let's go and select that. There it is. All right. It says texture is not readable. Don't worry about that. This is just an import setting. You can just hit the fix button and you'll see it didn't change anything about our model. But this also shows you how much darker certain things are. It doesn't bother me, and how much more vibranty bright other things are. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of how colors change a little bit, and that's fine, just something to keep in mind as you're working. You might say, oh, that came out a bit darker than I wanted. You can actually then take your image, and instead of repainting in Blender, you could simply take the image, go into just Windows Editor, and say lighten, darken, saturation, color, change the brightness. So all of that sort of stuff you don't have to even do in Blender. Just go into like photo software, like not even Photoshop, not even GIMP, just the rinky-dink stuff that comes with Windows, or I think Mac has stuff like that too, but I don't know Macs as well anymore. So just know that you can make those edits out. And in fact, I'm going to play with that real quick and load in a different version. I'll be right back. All right, so now that I've made two different versions, I'll import them. Now, one of these I made very little changes to. One I made quite a few. So I'll load these two colors in. And like I said, these are just ones I edited in the default like Windows sort of program. So here we go. Here's one that I just sort of made it a bit lighter, adjusted the exposure, and it looks okay. Now, what it's done though is we see a few lines bleeding through in a few odd places, so it might even be something where we load this back into, make some adjustments to get it in the ballpark we want, and then load it back into Blender to do the final touch-ups, like some blurring to make sure it looks right on the model. The other one I think is a little more extreme. That's this one, where I've really lightened it up. And while this is an interesting sandy brown, I don't like how it's fully washed out other areas. But if you're playing around, it's definitely worth just testing things out, seeing how they look before you commit, stuff like that. I should probably hit that button. Um, so this one obviously still is fairly rich, but maybe I just want to lighten the whole thing. I can also do that in Blender. So let's just show you how you could say, oh man, that is too dark. I want to lighten it up in Blender. So we'll show you that. All right. So now going back to Blender, I talked about like we can lighten this a bit. So now that I'm looking at it again, I'm like, yeah, that actually does look pretty dark, and it's maybe TaleWeaver's more true to it than I would think. So I'm going to lighten that, and I'm going to adjust some things and maybe finish some of the colors so we can get like our final color version. And I'll try not to fuss over it too much because we want to see the other parts like the metals and things. So I'm going to go do a lighten brush, and I'm going to pull that to be white. See how that looks? Ooh, that's way too white. Let's get that strength down. Let's get the fall off different. Let's take that off constant. Go back to smooth. Let's take the strength and go down to there. There we go. So if I want to lighten this, let's make that even lower. And I might say, let's just get that barely there. I could also do this with a little bit of a, like if you do this with white, let me go back up again. If you do this with white, it's pretty direct. If you do this with gray, it's a little softer. So you can adjust this not just in the strength of the brush, but in the level of sort of the tier you're lightening with. And it doesn't matter if it's brightly colored. I think it adds a little bit of a hue, so maybe I'll stick with like a yellow or gray. But we want to not be super loud with it, so let's just... Yeah, it's a little too much. I don't like that. Again, I'm the worst at making demos because I get too invested in what I'm doing. But hopefully that helps somebody with their work. Because I'm using this as like the lightening tool, I'm not actually painting new color onto things. I'm maybe changing the tone a little bit, but not by too much. So my overpaint is less of a problem. Like before if I'm overpainting a bright blue on an area, it's going to be really problematic and obvious, but I'm just overpainting a little bit of the lightness. So there we go. I think that is going to just convey the creature a little bit more. And because it's not too dark, it'll allow the shadows in game to have more of an effect on the model. Because if your model's black, like jet black sort of thing, then it's not going to change much light to dark. So there we go. A little color going here. Now for something like the straps, let me just blur that because I've got a little, smudge. So I've got a little overage there. Up the strength a bit more. There we go. Oop, some of that black's bleeding through. Be careful touching that. So to make sure that the straps look right, I'm probably going to change my fall off to a constant fall off. That way when I'm drawing over it, I'm just getting only that. So this is where it's going to be, pop up that strength to 100%. What am I doing wrong here? Oh, I'm on lighten still. Gotta switch over to mix. There we go. So this is letting me sort of get right and just sort of paint along. Now I'm going to be painting over a few things, but I want to be careful I'm not overpainting too much. Of course, the trick here is just the impression of it. So if you're not perfect, just remember it's okay. If you zoom in, just sort of paint along. You can spend a lot of time doing this. Just remember when you're investing your time, consider, put on an audiobook, but put on your music, enjoy yourself, but also consider how much time you're investing relative to the value it's going to add to your game, to the minis, because you can spend a lot of time. I know that I've done full mini sculpts for minis I've only used once, and I don't regret the time because I had fun doing the mini as my pastime. And even if it did not get used a lot, because the point was it was for a single fight, that's fine. I don't have to use it more than once, and that's okay with me. But if it's something where you're trying to get a lot of things out, don't feel like you have to all in one place. Now we're seeing a few oddities here. You'll notice, like that weird square, or those weird squares. Those are because we were really fast and loose with our normal map and our UV map. They're not really a problem. They're not going to cause problems, except for what you're seeing right there, where you've got a little funk. Those are caused because there are weird inverse areas here, and when we created our cage, it really can't handle these tiny inverted areas. Um, so that's where we talk about, is it better to clean up your model or not, and where I would say that for most times it's not going to cause an issue, because the details that you see here, where it's like, wait a minute, that's a little funky, or that's a little funky, it's like, okay, well, sure, but it's not affecting the overall model, and it's not affecting what we're going to use the model for, because it's almost too small of a detail to matter. Now, you might be like, oh, but every detail matters, and I'm a perfectionist, and if that's you, then you want to definitely do the longer version of this, where we go in and we do seam painting and everything like that to set ourselves up. But it's not 100% necessary. You may be aware that I did another video that talked about basically how to bring stick figure drawings into TaleWeaver. And I love that video because I strongly believe that that is a completely valid way of working, and that it doesn't have to be anything wild and crazy, as long as it conveys what you're looking to convey. All right, so I'm going to take this area and let's do, let's grab, actually, no, let's do, I should have painted that way. Let's just kind of shade that out. Blur tool's great. I'm just going to smudge our mistakes away. That's the best. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my brush tool. I'm going to try to pick a color that feels goldish, with the idea that these are going to be kind of a bronzy gold. I want that to be much darker. There, but not too right. So let's pick something like that, maybe. Yeah, that's going to sell it. But I'll make sure the leather covers it, because it's silly if it didn't. Obviously, this doesn't convey truly the way barding would portray, but just, is it good enough for jazz? Is it good enough for this mini? I believe it is. There we go. Got a little overfill there. Smudge it out. That's fine. Go. Perfect. Even this, I don't need to paint this fully. Let me just smudge it around a little bit. Be fine. That's fine. I don't even mind that. That's good. Stick that. It's fine. Smudge tool is my friend. All right, that'll do. And I could do some more like shading and details, and I invite you to sort of like have fun with that. But the amount that's needed is a matter, I think, of some debate. As I was saying, look at me, I'm sitting here re-darkening areas that I had chosen to lighten in the past. So we'll do that. That's perfect. All right. Ta-da! This is a quick paint job. Quickish. So we're going to re-export this. So click over here, image, save as. And I'm actually going to save this as a different version just because it's more finished, but just in case. So let's go ahead and do that. Save image. And we'll pop in and see what this looks like in TaleWeaver before we do. Oh, lies and slander. I forgot this. All right. Save that. And save the image as perfect. All right, now we'll see what it looks like in TaleWeaver. All right, so this is the one I had before that was pretty dark. So let's import the new one. Import new asset. 2. And there it is. Says it's not readable. Fix it. All right. So as you see, I did some of that lightning in Blender, and it looks really good. I think he's kind of bright and colorful, but I like that. I think the greens really sell it well. So we've got our mesh, we've got our normal, we've got our color. Now I could go back and fuss and details. I don't want to do that. Let's just let it be for the demo. Do the toenails, give them toenail polish later. This thing, paint wash. So paint wash is something I probably should explain when I get to the next stage, but paint wash adds to the mini a coating that is somewhat matte. And it does things like gives it a subtle texture that makes it look like it's been painted by hand. So from my understanding and from having talked with folks at TaleSpire, there's things like a little bit of a paint splotch sort of bits. So you see like little ditzels like that you might see on a painted mini. You might catch a bit of a fingerprint here and there. Things that make it give it that aesthetic that is shared by all the assets in TaleSpire. So it's really nice. It does give the minis a nice pop. Otherwise, your mini comes in a bit glossy. Now, the default of it being glossy may be good if you want this to be your base gloss. Now, this comes up when we do our next stage, which is the metallic AO roughness texture, because we'll be adding roughness to this that it may or may not like, and adding texture to it, which it may or may not like. So I'll example that with some flat colors.